So my name's Glen Martin. When I was traveling here this morning, I kept thinking, okay, how do you connect with the audience? I'm going to Idaho. I've heard all the potato jokes I want to hear, so I'm sure you've heard them all. I was literally on the airplane, had Wi-Fi, noticed the text message come up, text someone, said, I'm on a flight to Idaho, said 3, 2, 1, boom, potato joke. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that with the audience. So a little bit about me. My father is white, my mother's black. My father was a police officer for his entire career. Ultimately, he was the chief of police. My mother is a woman of color who moved us to a single-family household in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, back in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a pretty tough neighborhood. In fact, they used to call it Bed-Stuy, do or die. Tough neighborhood to grow up in. These days, just as gentrified and trendy as your city. So when I say that on stage in New York these days, people are like, oh, Bed-Stuy, amazing. I want to live in Bed-Stuy. I'm like, no, you're not getting the point here. Like, it was tough. Like, I grew up in a tough neighborhood. At age 16, I was shoplifting in a store in Manhattan, Macy's, and got arrested with a friend named Tyrone. And we were taken through central booking, and back then you stayed in central booking for about 3 days waiting to see a judge. That's how crowded the courts were and the jails and so on in New York. And I got in front of this judge, 16 years old, with a public defender, and the judge looked at the charges. I think it was resisting arrest and shoplifting, attempted shoplifting. And the judge said, I'm going to give Mr. Martin $1,500 bail to teach him a lesson. And we were so poor that $1,500 might have well been $15 million. It felt like ransom to me. And in New York at the time, up until 2 years ago, in fact, if you were 16 years old, you were charged as an adult. And so that meant I was on my way to a place called Rikers Island. And so I'm in the back of this bus, and I'm shackled around the waist and around the ankles, and with a bunch of mostly adult men on my way to Rikers. And for people who've never heard of Rikers or can't really conceptualize it, New York is a city of 9 million people. It's arguably the most progressive, resource-rich city in the country, maybe. And there's this island, 200 feet away from LaGuardia Airport, one of the busiest airports in the Northeast. And there's 10 jails on this island, so it's a complex of jails. And there's one way on and one way off, and there's this one bridge, and you get to the top, and you sort of look down, and it is the most intimidating sight you'd see anywhere, although I did just go out in the desert today with Mark, and you guys are running a close second. And you end up on this island, and as close as it is to this large city, it feels like the most remote place in the world. Because once you cross that threshold, you really know you're in someone else's world. And so before I tell you about the experience on Rikers, I'll tell you a little bit more about my family. I have 2 brothers, one older, one younger. My older brother's name is Sheldon. Sheldon, at the age of 17, went into the Navy, and it took him overseas, and he met new people, learned about new religions, new cultures. And he grew up, and he got a home in San Diego in the hills, and white picket fence and family and everything you want people to end up having, I guess, in this country. He really did end up with the American dream. And my younger brother and I both went to jail and then to prison. And in fact, my younger brother, Adam, he just came home on work release again a few weeks ago. So Sheldon grew up to become a correction officer, a federal correction officer. Thanksgiving is complicated as hell. And now he's a U.S. Marshal. Still love him. And yet the experience of having him have that totally different trajectory was useful for me because it really allowed me to see how opportunity really changed the trajectory of his life and arguably saved him from a lot of the pain that Adam and I suffered in the criminal justice system, and that Adam continues to suffer in the criminal justice system. And And so I always think about what opportunity means and how, when you think about mass incarceration, I mean, I took a look at your statistics on the way here, and man, you guys are outliers, like in the wrong direction. And as someone who's like been doing this work for 2 decades, I think that, that creates a lot of opportunity. And being in a room with such a diverse audience, I mean, folks who work within the system, folks who work in community, folks who work in faith-based institutions and so on, folks who come at this issue for all different reasons, people directly impacted. I think there's an opportunity, and I always believe that a small group of people can really change the world. And if you think I'm just saying that, by the end of my talk, you'll understand why I say that, why I believe that. So opportunity. So I go to prison. I go to jail first. I'm 16. I'm at Rikers. I'm going through processing. And I'm only there for 2 days. The judge makes it so that I come back to court in 2 days. Because he's only trying to teach me a lesson. He's not trying to leave me at Rikers, thank goodness. So I get to Rikers and I walk into this dorm setting and there's 60 children. I'm very careful about the words I use. They were children. We were all children. I don't care if we were at Rikers. We were children. And they're in this really hot, sweaty dorm space, and there's no air conditioning, and there's a couple of fans, and there's 2 phones on the wall for 60 children that are doing time, that want to reach out to their family and everything else. And of course, those phones become the central point of that facility, right? Like, that's where the power lives. If you own those phones, then you have the power. And Rikers Island was referred to as Gladiator School. I know you guys have a facility that you refer to the same way, but it really is predator or prey, and you have no choice. There's nothing in between. And you have to make that decision as soon as you get there. And so I decided not to use the phone. I was terrified. I decided to just sort of bide my time, hang out in my bunk, and really observe what was going on around me, because I knew I was there for 2 days. I knew there was this power play happening over the phone. And so I just pretended like I didn't really want to call my family. I don't need my phone time. Just did what I needed to do to avoid that. And then I get in the cell the next 2 days later, and I'm heading back to court. And of course, I'm hopeful that this judge is going to let go of this bail and let me go. And I'm in a cell that's meant to hold maybe 10 people. At the time, there were 22,000 people at Rikers. The facility is only meant to hold about 14,000. So all they did was just double bunk the hell out of it. Like, they just welded bunks to the top, and so they went from 14,000 beds to 22,000 beds. And I'm in this cell, and there's about 30 young guys in there, and there's correction officers in the middle, and a guy walks over to me and he says, "Stand up." And so I stand up, and he says, "Give me your jacket." And before he could say the word jacket, I swung at him, and we started fighting. Predator or prey, you have to make up your mind immediately. And as we're fighting, I feel suddenly I'm actually fighting 3 or 4 people. I'm actually getting jumped in the cell. And then I feel blood flowing down my neck. And before I knew it, I realized that he was actually stabbing me with a pen that was melted and fashioned into a dagger. And he stabbed me in the back once, and he stabbed me in the back of my head, and then he stabbed me here in the neck, and he left it there. And I remember the correction officers running towards the cell, and I was so scared that they were going to beat the hell out of us on top of what was already happening. And they pulled me out of the cell, and there's blood coming down on my shirt. And he takes me to a room, and he says, "Do you want medical care?" And I'm looking at him like, "What do you think?" Like, I'm bleeding all over the place. There's a pen sticking out of my neck. And he says, "Look, I can get you medical care, but you probably won't go to court today. And you're going to be labeled a snitch. And then you won't be able to survive here after that." And I was like, "Fine, just give me paper towels and I'll hold it on my neck. I want to go to court." I was 16. And so I go to court that day, and I get in front of the judge. And the judge looks down at me, and my legal aid attorney explains to the judge that I got into this fight on Rikers. And the judge never looked me directly in the face. I don't know if you've ever been in the courtroom, you're usually there for a couple of minutes, and most times it feels like everything is sort of happening around you. It's almost like you don't exist in the space, even though everything is about you. And the judge ends up rescinding the bail and letting me go on my own recognizance. There was no acknowledgement of what happened, no acknowledgement of the fact that I'm standing there with this bloody shirt on. He sends me home. And so I kept thinking, like, this judge wanted to teach me a lesson, and the lesson he taught me is, man, I can survive the gladiator school. That's what he taught me. That's what I walked away with. It's like I'm 16 years old. I got a hell of a war story to take back to the community. I survived Rikers. I'm still alive. He taught me I could do this. And it didn't stop me. I mean, I thought it was a huge, in retrospect, I thought it would have been such a huge opportunity to catch a 16-year-old at an important moment to change the trajectory of their life. And it wasn't until many years later when I got rearrested. I ended up serving a year at Rikers then. This was in my early 20s. Except the difference now is on my way to Rikers, I knew what to expect when I got to the top of that bridge. I knew how to make the dagger that the guy made that he stabbed me with. I knew how to survive on Rikers and to own the dorm and to make sure I owned the phones. So suddenly I wasn't the guy coming in wondering whether he was going to live there. I was the guy asking people coming in, if you want to live here and you want to use those phones, you need to abide by my rules. Predator or prey. And then I went to state prison. And I had 5 more years to do for this armed robbery conviction. And I'm taking this test to determine what kind of job I would have as I do time in correction. And this correction counselor comes over to me and looks over at my grades, and he looks down at me and he said, your grades are like awesome. He's like, you should go to college. I'm like, is this a joke? Like, I'm getting ready to do 5 years in prison. This guy's talking about going to college. I'm trying to get a job as a reporter. I'm trying to stay out of trouble. And I can look back at that moment now and romanticize it because it's years later and I understand now what that moment meant. I'm not sure I understood it in the moment. I think I was actually pretty bothered by it. But he sent me up to this prison 10 hours away from New York City. And within a couple of days, I realized there was a college program. And so here's this person who has this job working for corrections that arguably saw 200-300 people that day coming through orientation, who didn't have to take a moment to invest in me or to say anything about me going to college, and he did. And when I hear people say, like, what changed your life? It's so easy to be like, oh, it was that program, it was that college degree. There's so many interventions that we do that are actually important. The programs are important, but it's the people that really make a difference. And I might not notice that individual if he was sitting in this audience today, but it wasn't about college. College was great. It was a great experience. I took Russian literature, upper English lit, sociology, psychology, philosophy, you name it. Like, I was more free in that prison than I ever was in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. But it was that individual who stopped for a moment and said, you should go to college. And the reason I tell that story to audiences is that when you hear about mass incarceration, when I look at the stats here, the fact that you guys have tens of thousands of people under community-based supervision and thousands of others incarcerated, and all these laws and policies that get them there, but also that keep them from reintegrating successfully, that is pretty daunting to the individual. It's like, what can I do about that? Thank God that correction counselor didn't think that day. And so everyone in this room has a chance to plant a seed that grows into a tree that casts shade that you may never be able to enjoy. And so if you get nothing else from the rest of my talk, please just sort of hold on to that, because I want people to walk out of this room empowered to realize the role that they can play in changing the life of maybe one individual or multiple individuals, even if you won't see in your lifetime what that means towards ending mass incarceration. I mean, years later, when I had a chance to meet President Obama one-on-one, I really did think in my head and my heart that correction counselor who said to me, you should go to college. Because that was a seed that led to me sitting in the White House having a one-on-one conversation with the most powerful person in the world at that time. And I want to tell you this Obama story. So if someone in the audience, can you please remind me, if I have a few minutes towards the end, can you tell us the Obama story? It's funny as heck, but I got some other stories I want to tell. So I want to tell a story about a guy named Arthur that I met while I was in prison. It's a little warm in here for me. I'm going to take my vest off, sorry. It's just Boise. Don't wear a suit. You're gonna play yourself if you wear a suit. Okay, cool. Um, so when I went to prison, so when you go to prison, people assume that because you're out in the street, you're getting in trouble and you're getting arrested and all that stuff, that you sort of know what to expect when you go to prison. I didn't know what to expect in prison any more than anyone who watches Shawshank Redemption. I mean, I was just like scared to death. I didn't know what to expect. All of the concerns that you would imagine a person would have going to prison, even as someone serving time, I had those concerns. And I was pretty young. I was in my early 20s. And in New York, so our prisons, it's fascinating. Like in New York, our prisons are actually down 50%, our prison population. 50% in the last 2 decades or so. In New York City, I mean, I told you there were 22,000 people at Rikers. We're down now today, 7,300. So if that's, if that gives you any hope, when I launched Just Leadership USA, which I'll talk about, and the first thing I said is we're going to aim to cut our correctional population in half by 2030. And people are like, whoa. I'm like, look at New York. We kind of did it already. And I'll talk a little bit about how we did it because I really want to create hope and opportunity in this space. So I go to prison. I'm telling you why I'm so motivated by this, because a lot of people go to prison, they come out, they get a job, they do well, they move on, and they're not standing on stages trying to tell people we should end mass incarceration. But I'll tell you, I found that we lock up some of America's best and brightest. And that is not the story we tell about who we lock up in this country. And I did not spend every day in prison worried about like the next riot at 9 p.m. It just wasn't like that. In fact, the most difficult day in prison for me was the day I left. And it wasn't because I was crying, and it wasn't because I was excited about going home. That was great. It was because of the people I was leaving behind. It was because of the relationships I built while I was there. It was because of all the different times we cooked food together, like making a 3-course meal in a freaking microwave. I can make lasagna in a microwave, by the way. So I get into prison, I go through orientation, and all of our facilities, you guys have this experiment where like all your stuff is like together in one space in the desert. In New York, it's sort of like a gift to each county. So every time they lost an industry, it was like Governor Cuomo Sr. was like, here's a gift, here's a prison. So our prisons are like in these counties all over the state. It's like these economic engines for rural white communities that lost businesses over the years. And so it means that when you travel to a prison, if you were in a car, you could drive to Canada in a day. Except when you're in the correctional system, for some reason, that doesn't happen. It takes days to go from New York City to a facility 10 hours away. And in between, you stay at these other prisons. And part of it is, just to be frank, there's like a correctional facility worth of correction officers on the road any given day in New York, transporting prisoners around the state. It is what it is. I don't know what the method to the madness is. It is what it is. And so I end up at this prison. I'm in this beautiful, quaint town upstate New York. I mean, you could put this town on a postcard. It's called Auburn. Beautiful, and it's the middle of winter, and it's snowing, and I'm shackled in the back of the bus, and never even knew New York was so beautiful. There's cows in New York. There's horses in New York. Like, who the hell knew? And the first time I'm noticing it, I'm shackled in the back of a bus with a bunch of other people. And we're in this town, and we're going down Main Street, and there's this beautiful little gas station, and then the bus makes a sharp left turn, and there's Dante's Inferno. There's like this prison wall, 30 feet high, gray, dark, water stains, cracked, scary, Castle Grayskull. There's like a dark cloud on top, and there's like a lightning bolt coming down just over the prison. And I'm scared to death. And the gates open up, and we drive in, and they take us out the bus, and they start loading us into this cell block. And it's really dark, and the paint is chipping, and the windows, all the windows are open for some reason. In the middle of winter, all the windows are open, and we're all on this one tier. And I can see every guy and woman in here who served time sort of being like this right now in the audience. Like, I just know who my people are in the audience right away. And they know what's coming next, and they're probably gonna know the punchlines before I get there. And they put me into this cell, and there's another guy already in there. And I walk into the cell, and they slam the gate behind me. And that is, it's a cell, and it's double bunked. It wasn't meant to be double bunked. It's already too small as far as I'm concerned. And there's another guy in there, and I don't know him. And you sit on your bunk, and now you're trapped in a space with someone who you don't know, and it was pretty intimidating. And you could hear every other cell slamming shut, and you knew you were there for the weekend because I got there on a Friday, so you knew you were stuck there, no movement on the weekend, and you don't have any of your stuff with you because you're traveling, so you don't have the small things that you hold on to, like your hot pot or your photographs or your books, or you don't have anything. You have your prison garb. And so after about an hour, I say to myself, like, okay, well, I can't sit in this cell for 72 hours and not say anything to this guy. And so I say, hey, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Glenn. And he was like, oh, my name is Arthur. And then he didn't say anything else, and he sort of sat there on his bunk for a while. And then he started talking, except he wasn't talking to me, he was just talking. He was clearly talking to himself. He kept going. He didn't stop. He kept talking to himself. And within a few hours, someone came to the gate, and they gave him medication through the gate. And he took the medication, and then he sort of opened up again and started talking to me. And he told me where he was from. He's from the Bronx. He got arrested on a drug charge. He was facing 25 years. And he was offered a plea deal of 15 years to life. We had this thing in New York called Rockefeller drug laws, which were our mandatory minimum drug laws. And so he said he was 17 at the time, and they offered him 15 years, and he was like, I'm not going to take this 15 years, I'm taking this to trial. And he took it to trial, and he lost it. He got 25 years. And he had already been in for about 14 years. And so he said he got addicted to heroin in prison. Hopefully no one in this room is surprised by that. I mean, I didn't start smoking weed until I got to jail. Like, I wasn't exposed to drugs, and my neighbor actually was exposed to drugs at Rikers Island. And so he was taking Thorazine and some other medication to manage his mental health issues. And actually, what he would do is sometimes he would take the medication and he would hold on to it. He would ask me if I wanted it to help me sleep. It's like, that's been in your mouth, bro. Like, thanks, but no thanks. And so he told me about how his father, from the time he was 10 years old, would be in the kitchen and he would be cooking up crack cocaine and selling it in the neighborhood, and how it was so easy for him to end up selling drugs himself. He went from selling marijuana to selling cocaine to transporting drugs around for drug dealers, to getting caught with these drugs in his car, transporting them. So he wasn't even the big drug dealer, he was transporting it. But in New York, these mandatory minimums require you to be exposed to that amount of time. And so a day or so goes by, it's Saturday, and I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people where, like, if I'm getting a cold, the way I know is a sore throat. Like, right away, I get a sore throat, my glands start swelling, I'm like, that's the end of it. Can't do anything about this, I'm gonna be sick. And so because the window was open, because it was so cold in the cell, because the blankets were so thin, because there was nothing else to keep you warm, I started getting sick, and I started coughing and hacking and so on. And being sick is awful. Being sick in jail is the worst. And he says to me, he said, oh, you sound like you have a cold. He said, do you want me to make you some tea? This is the guy that was talking to himself a minute ago. I was like, how do I get to the front of this cell and yell for the CO without looking like a real blankety blank? I was like, okay, Arthur, I'd love for you to make me a cup of tea. Go ahead, make me a cup of tea. And he springs up from his bunk, and he's like, okay, I just need you to stay by the cell door and look out for the CO. I'm going to make you a cup of tea. I was like, I'll play along. We're stuck in this 10 by 8 space together. And so he grabs a plastic bottle that's in the cell that was empty, and he went to the sink and he poured water in it. And he took out a pencil, and he asked me for the roll of toilet tissue. And he tied a string from the bottle to the light fixture in the cell, and he ripped the mattress off the cell so that the bottle was hanging just above the bunk, and the string is holding it to the light fixture. And he uses the pencil, the lead in the pencil, to light the toilet tissue on fire on top of the bunk. And the bottle is hovering just high enough that it's not melting, but that it's spinning over the fire. And it's getting crushed, but it's not melting. And then the water in the bottle begins to boil. And he quickly takes the bottle off the string and he rips open the lapel of his prison outfit and he pulls out a tea bag and he pushes it in the bottle and he handed it to me. And he was like, "You should drink this tea, it'll make you feel better." So anyone who's been to prison is like, first of all, you probably knew where that was going because you've probably seen it before. And the reason I tell that story publicly is because I believe our criminal justice system as it is exists for a reason. It exists because we dehumanize the people we lock up, which makes it okay to do the things we do to them because they're not like us, they're the other. And as much as I can, as someone who served time in prison, I tell not only my own story, but I ask other people permission to also tell their stories. And they're stories that I hope people walk away with and are willing to tell somewhere else, to someone else, to undo the decades of storytelling that we've told about who we lock up. Because we really do lock up some of America's best and brightest. And my motivation, my ability to be out here doing this work for the last 20 years comes from people like Arthur. Because Arthur wasn't just some number, he wasn't just some statistic. He was a person who, in the middle of having his life extinguished by the Department of Correction, arguably, by the courts, by the police department, by all of these other actors, had the compassion to make me a cup of tea in a prison cell and to be thoughtful about how I was feeling in that space. So we can change policies, we can change laws, but that doesn't change hearts and minds. And that's what's been so fascinating about engaging so many of the people in this room. I had a chance to talk to maybe 10 or 15 people in this room, and people were not stuck on policy alone. People, yeah, I said we need to change some of these laws and so on, but it's clear to me that the people in this room are really motivated by the heart. And as someone who's changed laws, who's drafted laws, who's gotten laws passed, who's gotten Republicans, conservatives, progressives, all on board to do things, that's not what I want to be remembered for. I want to be remembered for tipping a system because I was able to get people to think about the folks in the system as human beings. That's what's going to get us to the finish line. So I want to go back to Rikers for a minute. I still want to tell the Obama story. It's going to be a big finale. So I come out of prison, so people are probably like, "Oh, well, what happened? You serve time, armed robbery, you go to Rikers, you go to prison, you get a college degree, then what?" So I come out of prison, I'm looking for a job, just like anyone else. I got a criminal record, but I got a college degree. I got a 2-year associate's degree. I'm good. Not so much. I apply for jobs, 50 different jobs in about 30 days, all entry-level jobs. Most of the people were like, you have a felony, we don't hire people with felonies. Some jobs I just wasn't a good fit. Maybe I can't fly an airplane just because I have an associate's degree. But then other jobs I was a perfect fit, perfect. I remember one time it was a guy who was selling sunglasses, and he was like, "Oh my God, like you're great, you're smart, you're articulate, you have salesmanship, like I'm gonna hire you." 3 hours later, he's like, "I didn't see this felony on your application. Can't really hire a guy with a felony." I'm not sure what having a felony has to do with selling sunglasses, but that one really hurt for some reason. I think I thought I got the job. So then I went to a reentry program. I didn't know what reentry programs were, but there was this amazing reentry program. It was called South 40. It was a combination of people who hadn't served time but who really cared, and people who had served time were working there also. And there was a guy named George Leno. Again, it's all about people. I don't know why I remember this guy's name standing on the stage today. His name was George Leno. I mean, I worked at a reentry program eventually. I gotta tell, I've never said to someone like, what is it about like this reentry program that worked for you? People don't say like, was that urinalysis like really changed my life? People say like, "Oh, it was George Leno," and for me it was George Leno. And he would come to my house every day, just wouldn't let me give up on myself. And I was ready to give up on myself, after 50 different interviews and stuff. And so he's like, "I got this job I want you to go to today." And I was like, "George, I've been to so many jobs you sent me to." He's like, no, this one's going to be a good fit. It's a nonprofit public interest law firm. He may as well have spoken Greek. I didn't know what that meant. And I go down to this nonprofit public interest law firm in New York, and I interview for this job, and there's like 7 lawyers sitting in the room interviewing me. And it's a job answering the phones at the front desk. making $16,000 a year. I owed $83,000 in fines, fees, restitution, child support. $83,000. But I interviewed, and I remember there was one lawyer, um, this woman named Debbie, who said, okay, we only have one step left. We need your parole officer to do a reference check. Really? Really? Like, good luck with that. Get back to me when you get the parole officer on the phone. And sure enough, they were never able, unfortunately, to get this parole officer on the phone, but they ended up giving me the job. And so I'm sitting at the front desk, I'm answering the phone, and I'm gonna be the best darn phone answerer you've ever seen. And I remember one day the mayor called, and I was like, oh, I'm on the phone with the mayor. Like, where do I work? Like, what's going on here? And just start digging in and sort of figuring out what kind of work they're doing. They were doing anti-discrimination work for people with HIV, drug and alcohol histories, and criminal records. And I was like, this can't be pure serendipity. Like, I have to be here for a reason. And so I started digging into the work that they were doing, learning what they were doing. And every time a job would open, I felt as though if I knew 50% of what I needed to know, I'd apply for the job. I'm a firm believer that you leap and you build wings on your way up. And I've done that my whole career since then. I know people get stuck and they want to make sure they have everything in place. Leap and build the wings on your way up. And I had 6 jobs in 6 years at this place. And in fact, I got to a point where I just sort of, I'll tell you what bothered. I got to this point where I was leading their largest program. It was called the National Hire Network. And Hire stood for helping individuals re-enter through employment. So I was doing work at the intersection of workforce development, criminal justice. And it was great, but it was a law firm, first of all. So I'd hit this glass ceiling where, like, if you're not a lawyer, there's not much more room for you. But also, what really bothered me even more is that because I wasn't a lawyer, I didn't have clients. And so I was disconnected from people who were coming home from prison. And I didn't feel comfortable only relying on my own story when I was in the room with the governor or the head of parole or the head of probation. It was great to suddenly have that level of access, but I felt disingenuous not talking to people who were coming home every day. I felt as though their challenges weren't necessarily my challenges. And so I left and I became the vice president at a place called the Fortune Society. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. It's a reentry program. It was started 1968 from a play, Fortune in Men's Eyes. It was off-Broadway, written by a person who had done time in prison. 1968, off-Broadway play, written by a guy who had done time in prison, about his time in prison, with a rape scene in the play and everything. I can't even imagine. This guy named David Rothenberg at the time was a theater agent for Elizabeth Taylor and a bunch of other folks, and he got his hand on this play, and he was like, wow, this is dramatic, I'm gonna take this off-Broadway. And he ended up on a late-night show, and all these formerly incarcerated people saw him on this late-night show and showed up at his office the next day. He had this long spiral staircase that went up 2 stories, and there were about 50 formerly incarcerated people there. And here's this white Jewish guy, Midtown Manhattan, theater agent, knows nothing about reentry, and all these formerly incarcerated people standing there. And you know what he did? He said, people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. You guys know more about what the rest of these people need than I do. So how about I just hire the first 3 people online, and you're gonna help the other 47 people that are here. That was the beginning of the Fortune Society. When I got there were 212 people on staff, $30 million budget, served 4,000 people per year. And I went there to do advocacy work. I wanted to continue to be an advocate, but I wanted my advocacy work to be informed and executed by people who had done time in the system. I thought it was, if you're gonna tackle an issue that's about people that have been dehumanized, the way to rehumanize them is to amplify their voices, let them tell their stories, let them be empowered to do the work. Because most people won't go to jail or prison. And so the question is, how do you help people connect with an issue? And it's the human stuff. It's just the human stuff. And so working at this place was amazing. Half the staff were formerly incarcerated, but also I had the chance to hear people's stories, their journeys. I mean, I didn't have mental health challenges, so I needed to hear from other people who did. I didn't have addiction challenges, smoked some weed at Rikers, but you know anything about Rikers. Smoking weed will help you get through the day. And so this way I had a chance to be exposed to people that had myriad issues. And women, you know, I'll never be a woman. So it was great to be around formerly incarcerated women and hear about their very specific challenges. If you're a guy, you can come home and you can couch surf. If you're a woman, you're pretty vulnerable trying to couch surf. You know, if you're a guy, you can come home and say, yeah, I'll get my kids in a year. If you're a woman, good luck with that. Like, you're being judged from day one. So it was great to be at this reentry program and to do advocacy work. And then after 6 years there, I said, you know what? I have a vision for what this work should look like that I don't feel like I can execute yet. Like I want to build something myself. I want to see what it's like to have a vision and to build something. And what I was really troubled by is that the more successful Glen Martin was, is the more it sort of reinforced the stereotype. Because just because you have one guy who makes it, that reinforces the fact that the majority of people are blank. You name it, fill in the blank. And I was bothered by that because the only reason I made it is because I'm not exceptional. I was exposed to exceptional opportunities. And so the question was, how can I expose other formerly incarcerated people to some of these exceptional opportunities? So I asked a friend of mine who was a lawyer to sit with me, and I know what I'm not good at. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And I'm not good with what's called tabula rasa, like blank slates. Like, give me a blank page, come back a week later, it's going to be Glen in a blank page. Like, I really need someone to sort of tease out the clay of something for me, and then I can build from there. And I asked her to come and sort of help tease out that blank page for me and put some substance on it. And she was like, well, what do you want to accomplish? I said, well, I feel like the field is not ambitious enough. Like, I met a field where, like, I came out of prison, I met all these amazing people, and if you're in prison, you don't really ask a person why they came to prison. That's like sort of taboo in prison. You just sort of avoid that conversation. Having said that, I know that that must mean that I have literally cried on the shoulder of people who've done some things that society would look at and say, right? I mean, I know it. I know that I spent time having meals with people who probably committed some crimes that would be defined as pretty heinous. But they were amazing people still, and they were complex. And they had values still. And so I found myself in rooms where some very well-intentioned colleagues would say things like, oh, no, we're not talking about people who, like, did robberies. We're talking about nonviolent first-time drug offenders. I'm not even sure those guys made it to prison. That's not the people I had time with. And then also, so I found myself telling elected officials, essentially, not me. You shouldn't be helping people like me. Like, no, we're talking about nonviolent first-time. And I just had a hard time with that. I did the work because I thought it was important. I thought we needed to make some progress. But in my heart, I knew we needed to get to the point where we believed that everyone has value. And so I said to this person, this lawyer, I said, let's start with the goal and let's make it really ambitious. And she was like, okay, so what's this ambitious goal? And I said, you know what? I have a child. His name is Joshua. So I didn't really get time with my older son, right? I said I came home with child support arrears, about $51,000 in child support arrears. This was the child who I didn't get time to spend with during his formative years. And so I really missed those. If you have children, if you have grandchildren, ages 1 to 6, 7, like, you can't miss that. That's the magic. And I missed that with my first child. And then I had a younger child. His name was Joshua. And I had a chance to spend that time with Joshua. And when I was building Just Leadership and she was asking me, like, what's this ambitious goal? I kept thinking, like, Joshua has like a 1 in 3 chance of being locked up before he's 18. And I was like, when's Joshua going to be 18? He's going to be 18 in 2030. And I said, you know what? I have to make this personal. This is going to be hard work, and I need to wake up every day and feel like this is extremely personal to motivate me. And I came up with this hashtag, half by 2030. And half by 2030, for me, my sort of personal selfish thing here was like, I'm going to save Joshua's life. I'm going to keep Joshua out of the criminal justice system. And I'm going to get the rest of the world to help me do it. And we're going to start with this goal of cutting the number of people under correctional supervision in half by 2030. And that became the mission of Just Leadership USA. And then everyone was like, well, how do you get there? And then people started asking questions like, well, how many people are you going to let out? And who are you going to let out? And where are they going to be let out from? And I was like, just hold on. Just hold on. Hold on even to your disbelief long enough. At least just sort of take this journey with me, because it was never about numbers. I don't want to play that game. There's other people can play the numbers game. Look at the reports, look at the data, all that stuff matters. But there's something else that matters. There's like culture. There's like how we think about these things, the decisions that we make. Like systems are made up of people They exist because we all believe in them. Rikers Island exists in New York because New Yorkers believe in it. Whether they like it or not, it exists because they believe in it. And if there becomes a day where they no longer believe in it, then believe it or not, it goes away. I'm going to prove that to you in a second. So people ask me, well, how do you get to half by 2030? And they were asking because they really wanted the sort of the mechanics of how you get there. And that was the hardest part of building this organization, was like getting people to suspend disbelief and to dream a little bit, to dream in color, to dream in HD, if you will. And I kept thinking to myself, okay, Glenn, what worked for you? And so the first thing I remembered was I was in this leadership training about 8 years earlier that someone asked me to sign up for, that at the time I wasn't even sure why I was signing up for it. I think I was doing fundraising for the agency I worked for, and a foundation came by to see this reentry housing we were doing. And the guy was from Walmart. In the middle of the tour, he was like, you'd be great for this leadership training. You should sign up. I can send you the link. And of course, I'm doing fundraising, so I'm bobblehead, like, yeah, whatever you say, just give us the check, whatever you say, give us the check. If you do nonprofit fundraising, you sort of get it. He sent me this link, and I took my resume and I just cut and pasted it and put it into the application and sent it off. We ended up getting the check. We built the reentry housing, $43 million building, supportive and affordable housing, Midtown Manhattan, beautiful building. So I get into this training, and there's a guy named David Mensa. You guys have to get David here at some point. You have to get David Mensa here. Mark will tell you more about David if he hasn't already talked your ear off about him. But just totally changed my life. Took my career and everything else in my life from like this to like this. And so I wanted that for formerly incarcerated people. It was interesting because 50% of the training was amazing, and the other 50% was just really weird because they weren't formerly incarcerated people. I was the only formerly incarcerated professional in the training. So there'd be moments where you'd say, okay, let's do this session about like college. Let's talk about when we were all in college and what it was like to build. And I was like, bro, I was sitting in the jail cell. Like, I went to college, but I was sitting in the jail cell. I can't really relate to the rest of these stories. But I wanted to take the pieces that were amazing and then build another training that was much more culturally competent for formerly incarcerated people. And so I hired David, and we built this year-long training, and all the things that I got exposed to that helped to propel my career. Now, 600 formerly incarcerated people, including Mark and a couple others in this room, have had some exposure to. And then membership. So I believe that the problem we were having with criminal justice reform is that we were having these siloed conversations. We were sort of like, if you were in criminal justice, if you were working for probation or parole or correction, or you had some other connection, then we were all sort of talking to each other. And I think that that's the way to begin a conversation, but I mean, as you've seen recently, everyone is talking about criminal justice, and that was part of my goal, is just sort of break the issue out of the silo. So we built this membership, and it was free for people in prison. Everyone else paid $1 a month to be a member. We knew it wasn't going to really make us money. At the best, we'd break even, but more importantly, we'd build like this base of support. And by the time I left, we had members in every single state. So it was leadership, membership, and then advocacy. So I'm an advocate. That's what I am. I don't apologize for it. Like, my job is to agitate, to disrupt, to get people to either be incentivized to behave differently or to be pressured to behave differently. And I'm very apolitical. You know, having not gone to college and gotten traditional education as a young person, having not been civically engaged as a young person, I really don't give a damn if you're a Republican, Democrat, whatever. If you're not doing the right thing, I'll come after you. And I'll give you the example. So people are like, well, what's the first thing you're going to do to prove you can get to half by 2030? I was like, well, we got a bold organization, bold mission, half by 2030. We need to be bold with our advocacy. We're going to shut Rikers down. I said it in a room like this. There were about 300 people in the room. Most of my colleagues that I had worked with at that point for about 14, 15 years. I'll never forget how quiet the room got. And the looks on people's faces. Some were chuckles, some were confusion, some were like, can you please like get Glenn off that stage, like save him from himself? And I had a couple of my colleagues who had run reentry programs for years in New York come over to me afterwards and say, Glenn, you know, heard you talk about shutting down Rikers. Like, you've had an amazing career. Like, your trajectory's like this. Like, you gotta be careful putting stuff like that out in the world. It was scary. I want to say that. Like, pushing for the world to look really different and spending the most important moments in life is like those moments where your knees are shaking because you know there's a professional, personal price to pay for the next thing you're about to say. And yet, those are the moments where you need to open your mouth and say what you need to say. Because in the end, our legacies are not written in the moment. It's going to be written decades from now. And the question is, what do you want said about you? You could say like, oh, he had a great career and he helped a lot of people, and that's a good legacy to have. You can also have a legacy that says, you know what, he really at the right moments, or she really at the right moments, like disrupted things and really changed the whole trajectory of things. And everyone has the capacity to do that because everyone has privilege. And the question is, what do you do with that privilege? Do you identify and step away from it and say, okay, I know I have privilege, but I don't have to use that. That's not how things change. Things change where you say, I know I have privilege and I'm going to wield it at the most important moments, especially when I'm doing it with other people who are not as privileged. I'm going to sometimes say the same thing they're going to say because I know I'm going to get a different outcome. And we all have privilege. So I say we're going to close Rikers, and I'm thinking, we got this progressive mayor in New York. I went to his inauguration. I was invited. Mayor de Blasio is running for president, just like everyone else is. And he's super progressive, and he's in this city that's super progressive. And I went to his inauguration, and Harry Belafonte was there, and all these other people were there, and it was like Woodstock. It was like, we're going to change the world. And we had just gotten out of Mayor Bloomberg, who was amazing. He was an amazing manager, but he did some really harsh things around stop and frisk and stuff. So, I'm sitting there, and I'm like this advocate, and I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and hoping that this mayor is going to take us to the promised land. Man, he became our biggest opponent. He just was not having it. So I said to myself, okay, there's been 2 efforts to close Rikers. A little bit more about the history of Rikers, by the way. Rikers Island was purchased for $180,000 from a guy named Richard Riker, the Riker family, very aristocratic family in New York. Richard Riker himself used to run all of our courts. He was like the head of our courts in New York, like our chief judge of courts in New York City. He was also part of something called the Kidnap Club. And at nighttime, he'd go out and kidnap young men of color and put them in cells and then bring them in front of his court the next day and then send them back into the slave-holding South, even if they were already free. That's the history of Rikers Island. And the city purchased it and did a few other things with it. It was rat infested at one time. It was a pig farm at one time. It was a burial ground at one time. It was a chemical dump at one time, and then it was Rikers Island. So it has like this insidious history that arguably everything we built on top of it has been just as disgusting as the foundation that it started on. And yet this mayor, for whatever reason, maybe because he's not a good manager, maybe because he doesn't really believe his own rhetoric, whatever, he became the biggest opposition. And I went out and I raised $5 million just for that campaign alone. And we chased him all over the country. He couldn't go anywhere without us being there first. And even though it went from my colleagues saying, there's no way you're ever going to close Rikers, it's not going to happen, think about your career, stay out of trouble, don't do that, do something else. 12 months later, everyone in New York was like, we got to shut down Rikers. What was the magic in the middle of all that? Because they tried to close Rikers twice before. One about 40 years ago, the other one about 2009. But I knew there was an element missing in both of those campaigns, both of them. It was people who had suffered at Rikers telling their stories to other New Yorkers who had never been to Rikers, who didn't understand Rikers, who didn't know when they looked down from an airplane leaving LaGuardia that they were looking down at Rikers. It was the human connection. It was the, I don't want this thing to exist in my name. What? You were there as a 16-year-old, you got stabbed 3 times? And my tax-paying money supports that, $290,000 per bed per year. 85% of the people there are detainees, not even convicted of a crime. The jail architecture is flat and long because it's next to the airport. You couldn't build high, so there's no recreation, there's no library, and correction officers don't want to walk people down long hallways because they're exposed. Their safety is in jeopardy, so people sit in cells all day. People didn't know that. New Yorkers didn't know that. And it wasn't just about sharing the data. The data didn't really do it. The data was important, but it was the stories. It was the people who were harmed by Rikers all over New York, in churches, in synagogues, in mosques, in schools, at City Hall, at the City Council, everywhere, saying, let me tell you about this place called Rikers. 12 months, the mayor said, yes, we're going to close Rikers. And now they're working out all the details. What does that look like? We have other jails in New York. The mayor wants to build 4 new ones. There's an argument about whether we need 4. But check this out. When I was at Rikers, there were 22,000 people there. I did an op-ed in the Daily News in New York last week. You know what we're debating over right now? The mayor says, we can get to 4,500. Me and my folks are saying we can get to 2,800. Imagine that. Did we ever really need 22,000 people at Rikers on any given day? I'm not so sure. Think of all those lives, all that human carnage, all that waste, all that harm, all that hurt to families, to communities. And so for me, it's great to be able to have a vision and then to convince other people that it's a shared vision, and for all of us to move policymakers in the right direction and get to the point where we're debating whether it's 4,500 or 2,800 in a place that once had 22,000. But now we have to say to ourselves, well, what do we want the future to look like? Right? Like, we are building institutions for the future. So in some ways, we're sending a message to our future selves that this is what we believe corrections should look like. So in a city of 9,000, you need some jail cells. I live in Harlem still. You need some jail cells. You don't need thousands and thousands of jail cells. You don't need people with serious mental illness in jail cells. You don't need people with addiction issues in jail cells. You don't need victims of sexual violence in jail cells. There's all these other off-ramps that we can create for people, and now's a chance for New York to do that, to send a message to our future selves that this is what we intended. We intended to not keep people tethered to the criminal justice system. Because look how we ended up here. We look now, we see things like probation, even alternative incarceration programs. We have to be careful that we're not net widening. Anyone ever heard that term, net widening? The idea that you create something that's supposed to be an alternative to incarceration and it ends up just being an alternate sentence. The fact that the whole system has grown alongside each other, probation has grown, parole has grown, even diversion programs have grown. And you might be like, well, why is he saying diversion programs have grown? That's a good thing, except if you let a young person into a diversion program as a judge who has no appetite for risk to begin with, and then they get in trouble and they come back in front of me, first thing I'm saying is, I gave you a chance, and now I'm going to punish you. And I'm probably going to punish you more harshly than if people would have left you alone in the first place. I'm going to give you a concrete example of that. When I was at the Fortune Society, our young people who were in our 6-month ATI program, Alternative to Incarceration, were getting arrested over and over at the train station at the corner. After a while, I was like, one of us needs to go down to the train station and figure out what's going on. Why are these young people who've been in our program for 3 or 4 months going back to jail for like spitting in the subway, for jumping the turnstile? So I go in the train station and I go with one of the guys that was arrested, and we sit there and we watch. And the NYPD officers are hiding in a room that looks out onto the right side of the subway entrance where all the young people come from the Fortune Society into the train. Meanwhile, there's another side where all the young students, mostly white and Asian, are coming down from a high school, but they're not focused on these kids. And I'm watching, and our young folks are doing what? They're jumping the turnstile, they're spitting, they're putting their gum on the ground, they're doing all this stuff. It's illegal, they're doing it. They're doing all the same things. But if you're an NYPD officer and you grab this child, because they have a previous conviction, you get to take them to central booking and you get 4 hours overtime. If you grab these children, you give them a desk appearance ticket, they go on their way, and you punch out and you don't make overtime. It's pretty insidious, except if you're not there to really watch it up close, then you don't understand why these kids here are suddenly failures in the ATI program. Now they go back in front of the judge, and the judge doesn't know about this thing that's happening with the NYPD. All he knows is that he gave this kid a shot, and the kid messed up. And now I need to show as a judge that I'm going to punish you. And sometimes that punishment is more harsh than if we would have not had them in the program at all. So as we move forward and we envision something else, it's important to recognize that systems of oppression are durable and they reinvent themselves right under your nose. And sometimes we take part in creating that. So as we think about ending mass incarceration, we also have to have a vision for what's next. We have to be the ones to figure that out. We can't wait for some government institution, we can't wait for some legislator, some mayor, some governor, some president to figure that out. These systems exist because we all believe in them. We have the power. We have the power to change the lives of the individual, and we have the power to reshape the entire system and what it looks like. No one else has ever had the power. I remember sitting in college and prison and reading Margaret Mead's quote, right? Never believe that a small group of people can't change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. My whole career has borne that out. We started with this Rikers campaign with about 6 people sitting in the room saying, how are we going to get New York City to believe we can shut down Rikers? I'm going to tell my Obama story. I don't miss anything else, though. It's such a good story. You guys feel the anticipation of the story? Okay, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything else, though, because there's no coming back from the Obama story. I'm just teeing it up here. I'm teasing you a little bit. Okay, I think I have like 11 minutes, 12 minutes, yeah? Cool. I have some jokes I forgot to tell. Sorry. Had a bunch of stats about Idaho. They're depressing. Now, I wish you guys well, seriously, but it's depressing. But at least I know you're doing great stuff. I actually met people in this room that are doing great stuff, especially the folks who are working to connect people to employment and housing and so on, post-incarceration. That stuff matters. Okay, so I have this 20-year career. I launched Just Leadership. I really don't have an organization. That's the other thing. Like when Just Leadership started, it was just like a concept paper and me and a bunch of social media and me making it feel like it was bigger than it really was. I figured if I could get people to believe it was bigger than it really was, then they would want to be part of it. People want to get on the train that's left the station. And we did well. We raised $43 million in 4.5 years. But in the beginning, I was doing a bunch of television, MSNBC, CNN, local television, and everything. And so it was getting us, and it was at the beginning of this whole Black Lives Matter movement, actually. So it was like all this momentum, people were looking for organizations that they thought were doing good work. And that sort of lifted us. We didn't sort of adopt that messaging, but it still sort of gave the program a lift. And I got invited to DC. I got invited to DC to go to the White House. It was my first time getting invited to the White House. And it was like, you know, I mean, it's easy for me to stand up here and talk about all the things I've hung out with Richard Gere, I've hung out with John Legend, I have hung out with Bishop Desmond Tutu, I have hung out with Sandra Day O'Connor, like all these amazing people I've had a chance to meet. And it's easy to sit up here and talk about it now all glowingly and romantically, but it's pretty phenomenal to go from like sitting in this prison cell to having these opportunities. And getting the chance to go to the White House just felt like culmination, like, yeah, this is it. And I was invited by the Joyce Foundation and this other think tank to go to DC and go to the law school down the block from the White House and have a meeting about criminal justice reform with this very diverse group of folks, advocates, legislators, directly impacted people, and so on, about criminal justice reform, and we would take notes and everything, and then we'd all walk over to the White House together and meet with the domestic senior policy advisors to the President of the United States. And I'd never been to the White House. Even as a visitor, even as a tourist, I've just never been to the White House. And here I was getting invited because they wanted to hear what I had to say about criminal justice reform. So I get in this law school room and I look up and there's all sorts of people there. There's prosecutors, there's civil rights advocates, there's some Black Lives Matter folks there, there's law enforcement there, there's parole, there's probation, there's correction, there's all, like you name it, the gamut is in the room. And we have a very engaging discussion, very well sort of structured, very well facilitated. And then it's about 4 p.m. and everyone gets up and they start grabbing their luggage and we start heading over. And in my career, I have found that like I need to constantly make myself uncomfortable. Like otherwise, it's just so easy to always be comfortable to walk in a room and sit next to the person you already know and feel comfortable in the space and so on. But what I try to do is pick the person in the room. And I'm like, I'm probably going to disagree with this person, so I'm going to sit next to this person. And so as we walk over to the White House, there's this prosecutor guy who kept saying stuff that was driving me crazy. And I was just like, I'm going to walk with him. And so we walk over to the White House together, and he's telling me about his diversion program for young people and how proud he is as a prosecutor to be diverting young people out of the system. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, like, we just shouldn't be sending children to prison to begin with. Like, I know you're proud of your little program, but, like, can you dig a little deeper? And, of course, I'm saying it diplomatically. This is just, I'm giving you guys my sort of thinking in my head. And we get to the White House, and it's time to walk in, and I don't know what it's going to be like, but one thing I know is I have a criminal record. And if anyone in this room has a criminal record, you know that if there's law enforcement involved, you're like, this may not go well. So I get to the White House, and there's like all these levels of security to go through. But the first one is this booth. And you walk in, and you give your ID. And they already have your name. They got it a month earlier. And you assume that they've already done whatever they need to do, background checks, whatever. And I give my ID. But the guy in front of me gave his ID first, the prosecutor. And when he gave his ID, he got this badge to hang around his neck. And he hung the badge around his neck. It was a big green badge. And it was like, pass, with a number in the middle. And I was like, okay, I get my ID, I'm waiting for my pass. And he throws me the pass, and it's bright pink. And it says, needs escort. And so we talk about the scarlet letter of the criminal record. I can't tell you, like this was like the sort of crystallization of that. Like I take this thing and I put it on my neck, and so I'm wearing a badge that's different than everyone else's badge. And it's funny because my colleagues don't notice it. I notice it. Like I feel it. Like I gotta like 15 years after I come out of prison, and that moment felt like the moment I was standing in front of that judge taking a plea to the case. Like the shame and the guilt and all of that came back to me in that moment. And so we're walking through the other levels of security, and I get through one or two more levels. They're doing all sorts of stuff. You really don't know what's going on when you're going in the White House. Like there's this moment where they're like, stand here, and there's like this barrier here and this barrier here. You know there's a Secret Service agent standing here, and you know there's a dog standing there, but nothing's happening. You're just standing there for a couple of seconds, and then they're like, okay, go ahead. And you just feel violated. You don't know what just happened, but you just feel violated. But I made it through all those levels, and I get to the last level, and it really is like this Secret Service agent, and he's sitting up high, about 2 feet up in the air, and he looks down at me, and all my colleagues are passing by him and going through the final door, and he says, you have to stop, you have to wait here. And I pull over, and I'm waiting here, and so now all my colleagues are going by, and I'm sort of, I'll be honest, I was embarrassed to try to deal with it, like in the moment. So I sort of let all my colleagues go by, and some of them look at me and they're wondering what's going on. And finally they all go in, and I say to him, I say, okay, so what do I need to do to get in? And he was like, well, you need an escort. And I was like, okay, well, who's supposed to escort me? He was like, well, who invited you? I was like, well, like Valerie Jarrett, like the advisor to the president. He's like, then she needs to come down and get you. It's like, oh, okay. So I get on my phone and I start writing emails to the people who were handling the invitations and so on. And I'm telling them I'm downstairs and I'm standing here, and he's just looking down at me very disdainfully, and other people are coming in. And It's an hour-long meeting. It's about 35 minutes into it. So finally, at about 40 minutes in, there's this big door behind him, and the door comes flying open, and this young white woman comes out and says, "You are?" And I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm going to take you in." And she grabs me, and we go in. And I walk by the Secret Service guy, and he's looking down at me like this, and I just looked up and I'm like, "Whatever, I'm going to the White House." And so I go in, and she takes me, and we get to the elevator together, and she's like, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Donaldson." I was like, "My name is Martin." She was like, "Your name's not?" I was like, "No, my name is Martin, but please don't take me back. Please take me upstairs to this meeting." So she's like, "Okay, I'm sorry. I'll escort you to the meeting." So hold on. Don't let the irony get lost here. A black man gets invited to the White House with a black president to talk about criminal justice, gets locked out. This young white intern kicks the damn door and grabs anyone she wants, walks right by Secret Service, no questions asked. So that's the first moment I just held on to, like, what the heck just happened? So I get up to the meeting. There's about 50 of us sitting at this huge table, policy advisors at the front, flanked by all of their assistants and aides and so on. Clearly, there's like this heavy conversation happening about what happened earlier in the day. Everyone was supposed to tell like one or two things from during the day that you thought you wanted the president's advisors to know. And it's coming around the table, and it finally gets to me. And as I walk in, I can see my colleagues are like, "Oh yeah, Glenn wasn't here. Like Glenn just got here. Like what the hell just happened?" And it gets to me, and didn't I just say a few minutes ago, like the most powerful moments are the moments where you're like really scared about what price you might pay for saying something out loud, right? Whether it's a personal or professional price. So my knees were just shaking under that table. And I was grappling with, do you just do what the heck they told you to do? Do you just talk about these one or two things from earlier today? Or do you talk about what it was like just now downstairs in front of the White House? And that's exactly what I did. I said, with all due respect to my colleagues and to folks who work here at the White House, I said, I think the most powerful thing I can talk about today is actually what it felt like to be an American with a criminal record, to be invited to the White House and be denied access to a place that is supposed to be for everyone, a place that is, what does it mean to be marginalized? What does it mean to be branded for the rest of my life? What does it mean 20 years later to not be able to get into the White House at an invitation to have a conversation about criminal records? What does it mean to all of our work, what just happened to be downstairs? And granted, there won't be a lot of formerly incarcerated people that have this opportunity, but there will be formerly incarcerated people who wake up tomorrow and go to McDonald's and have the same experience, who go to Starbucks and have the same experience, to go to Home Depot and have the same experience. And so that's what I want to share with this room, that the power is within us to welcome people back into the fold of communities and not keep people at the margins. It was a tough thing to do in that room. Like, I felt the tension. I felt like the shame. People felt shameful. People put their head down. People felt badly. People felt badly that they didn't know what was going on. They probably felt badly that clearly I was the only formerly incarcerated person in that group of 40 plus people also. I was the only one stopped. So I remember walking out the White House that day and thinking, well, that was difficult. Not exactly what I was hoping for. But what else can I do here? What can I do with this moment? Like, is this about Glenn, or is this about something much larger than Glenn? And I get back on the train in New York. There's this Amtrak train that goes up the Northeast Corridor, a few hours between New York and DC. And I use that time to start writing a letter. And it's a letter to Obama. And it's a letter about what the experience was like not getting into the White House. And I decide by the time I get to New York, I was like, you know what? This is not about me. This is about something larger than me. And I decided to make it an open letter to President Obama. And so I sent it to him, and I sent it to the Wall Street Journal. And they printed it, and the Washington Post printed it. And lo and behold, I get an invitation back to the White House. A week later, boom, I'm on the phone, Roy Austin. We want you to come back. We can't believe this happened. Shouldn't have happened. We want to fix it. We want to make it better. I get invited back to the White House. They actually say to me that the Attorney General of the United States is actually going to give me an escort into the White House. I was like, you know what? Thank you. I don't want that. I want to be able to walk into the White House with my pride intact the way everyone else walks in. And I go there to the White House, and I get to the front gate, and I hand in my ID, and they hand me this green badge. And I walk in with my head up, and I walk into a room like this, and I'm seated in the front row, it's reserved and everything, and then this guy comes over to me, he's like, no, 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 you're actually here, you're on stage. I was like, oh, not just at the White House, I'm on stage at the White House. It's like a blue curtain and a podium, and it's like I'm on stage. So I get on stage, and all of these other big names come out, and we have a discussion about criminal justice reform. And it was a moment. It was a moment because I knew it played out all over social media. I think Mark, you might have seen it at the time. And it made sure that other formerly incarcerated people did not face the same humiliation that I faced. In fact, the doors were wide open afterwards. People just did not have that experience. And it was at a time where our country was deciding that the voices of formerly incarcerated people are important to this issue. So here's where the story is funny. So I finish my talk, I get back in the audience, I'm good. I'm like, I've done my work as an advocate, I push people hard enough, I got the policy change, other people are gonna benefit, other people are gonna be valued. I got a chance to be on stage at the White House, somebody took some pictures, I'm good. And somebody comes over and he says, can you just come with us, Mr. Martin? Like, okay. Like, just follow us. So I get up and I follow him, and he takes me off through a doorway, and we end up in this room. It's a small room, maybe the size of the stage, and there's a flag set up, and there's about 4 or 5 doors, and there's these Secret Service agents just whizzing by, going in and out the doors, in and out the doors, and there's a photographer, and he's standing by the flag. I'm about to meet the president, clearly. So I look around to see who else is in the room, and the head of public safety for Connecticut was there, Mike Lawler, the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, the current Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, one or two other elected officials, a couple of congressmen were in the room, and Ludacris and Ashley Judd were in the room. So this is surreal as hell at this point. And Ashley Judd is like playing with a puppy. This sounds like a dream. This really happened. I lie to you not. This really happened. So in my head, I'm thinking, I'm like the least important person in this room, or at least the least interesting person in this room. And so I know Obama's coming through one of these doors. And the question is like, what's he gonna do first? Who is he gonna walk over to first? And I'm waiting there, and I'm nervous, and I'm like, what am I gonna say to him? What am I gonna say to the president? I couldn't even talk to other people in the room. I was just so in the moment. And then, like, you meet people, you see people on television, and you meet them in real life, and the experience is usually a bit different. And the question is like, is this guy gonna be everything people says he is? And the door opens up, finally, and there's this bright light that comes in. I'm serious. And Obama just floats into the room. He's not even walking, he's floating. Okay, now I'm exaggerating. And he has on this suit that looks like somebody painted it on him. It looks like he was born into this suit. And there's this halo above his head. And he glides into the room, and he goes over to Ludacris. And he says, Luda! And he gives him a 5, and they start talking about Ludacris's sneakers for like the next 4 minutes. And I was like, okay, at least I know where his priorities are. But I gotta tell you, it was amazing because as a leader, he just has this thing where when he's finally talking to you, he's only talking to you. Doesn't matter who else is in the space. And so he works his way around the room, and he finally comes over to me. And I was like, Mr. President, and before I could even say my next sentence, he's like, I know who you are, you're Glen Martin. And he was like, I'm sorry about what happened to you here at the White House. That shouldn't have happened to you. And we've changed the policy, and formerly incarcerated people, their voices are important, and I'm so thankful for all the work that you've done. And he started rattling off things that I've accomplished over the last 15 years. And I said, Mr. President, I have 3 things to say to you. Like, I've been thinking about what I needed to say. I have 3 things to say to you. And I was like, 1, I want to thank you for bringing higher education back to the criminal justice system. So I had been working for years with Dallas Pell, the daughter of Senator Claiborne Pell, to bring Pell Grants back to people in prison because of what college did for me while I was there. And we found out that there was a loophole in the regulations that allowed the president to bring it back for 12,000 people without even Congress changing the rules. And his administration did that, so I thanked him for that. And then of course I thanked him for the thousands of clemencies and pardons that he did, but more importantly for like having breakfast with people that he had pardoned, because I thought those moments were as important as the pardons themselves, because it just rehumanized those people. And then lastly, this is the hard part. So my barber, if you know anything about like black barber shops, like that's where all the politics in the hood happens. And so my barber is super opinionated about politics, but he also is a barber. And he kept saying to me, I know one day you're gonna meet President Obama, and I need you to tell him that I don't like his haircut. And that I'm gonna much better job of cutting his hair. And he was like, commit to that. And I was like, yeah, I commit to that. Of course at the time I didn't think I'd ever meet the president. I was like, yeah, I got you, bro. I got you. If I meet President Obama, tell him you gotta cut his hair. And I'm standing in front of President Obama, and I was like, Mr. President, the third thing I have to tell you is that my barber said that you have a bad barber, and that he'd like to cut your hair. He took it in stride. It was a great moment. Gave me a hug, took a picture, gave me a pound. So, I don't want you to walk away from all of this just having heard like this great story about this guy who served time in prison and was able to accomplish a whole bunch of things in life, because like everyone else's life in this room, there's like the things people see, and then there's all the other stuff that's happening behind the scene. Like I'm a human being like everyone else in this room. I have a very tumultuous life outside of my work life. There's so many challenges, there's so many moments of fear, there's so many moments of decision making, there's all sorts of family stuff going on. There's all these challenges of trying to balance personal life and professional life. There's relationships that work and relationships that don't work. There's issues around money. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on in my life, just like everyone else's life in this room. And I think that we want to make sure we don't do what I found that this movement has been doing a little bit too often, which is hero worshiping. Like we find that formerly incarcerated person or those formerly incarcerated people that just like really make us feel good about who we are and what it is that we do. And over the last 18 months or so, I've had like the most difficult moments in my life, and people like Mark have really kept me alive and going through depression, through suicidal ideation, and all sorts of other things that I've been challenged with. And what I really appreciated about that, Mark, I haven't said this to you, sorry I'm putting you on the spot in front of this audience, but is that you allowed me to like be a human being when I needed to. You know, when everyone else is sort of hero worshiping or doing the opposite, ripping the hero down, like you just were like, you know, you're human and you deserve everything that human beings deserve compassion and hope and opportunity and so on. And if there's anything I could have done differently in my career, is I really played the role of hero to attract the resources and the people and the power to be able to accomplish the things I've been able to accomplish. But if I had to do it all over again, and I still have the chance to continue to do it, I want to paint a more sort of human picture. Because the majority of people are not going to be Glen Martin. And even Glen Martin wasn't the Glen Martin that most people bought into. Like, I'm just as fallible as anyone else. I get it right, I get it wrong. And so we, as people who are out there helping formerly incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated ourselves, I think we need to have the biggest appetite for people getting it wrong. People don't go from doing the wrong thing to doing the right thing. It's not linear. It really is more like this. And if you don't have an appetite for this in your work, then you're not doing re-entry work. Think about if you smoke, if you eat food that you shouldn't be eating. Think of all the things you do and you say, I really want to change that. You know, I really want to do it differently. Like me, I mean, I smoked while I was in prison. Like, quitting smoking is so easy. I've done it like 100 times. and we need to have an appetite for that. Human beings are complex and that the program itself is important, but the glue in between is the compassion that you all bring to the table. So this has been great. I didn't get to cover everything I thought I'd cover, but hopefully this has helped move the ball forward, because here in Idaho you have such an opportunity, and I hope that what you get out of this talk is hope and
understanding that it doesn't matter if it's just a small group, like this small group can just create so many powerful things. I look forward to coming back here one day and hearing about what you've been able to create and shrinking that god-awful thing you have out there in the desert that's causing so much pain. That thing is pretty insidious, and the people in this room can envision something else. And I have no doubt that you can do it, and that you'll do it, and I'm here to support it. We said we wouldn't wrap up with questions because my job here is to motivate you, but the magic is your colleagues, your friends, your family, the other people in this space. So I urge you to spend some time talking to each other. I'll be around to talk about anything that might have come out of this talk. I'll stick around for a while, but thank you for the opportunity.